Hi everyone, Chris of the Polish Geek, and welcome to another old video game review. And I decided, because after playing Doom the Dark Ages and even saying in my review, I realized that it actually has a lot more in common with Quake really than with Doom. So I decided to review Quake, because I even said in my review that I was always more of a Quake guy than a Doom guy, and sure, Doom the Dark Ages might be my favorite modern first-person shooter, but my actual favorite first-person shooter is Quake. So, and after playing through Doom the Dark Ages and realizing how much more in common it has actually with Quake than with Doom, I decided, why not just review my favorite first-person shooter of all time. I just love the gothic medieval atmosphere and the Lovecraftian horror. It's so awesome. But I'll also say one more thing about Doom the Dark Ages though. As much as I love the game, it's my favorite modern first-person shooter, I'm actually very glad the game is tanking, because the fact that it just released one level on physical copy and then made you buy the rest digitally, like, what the hell? Like, I am very much strictly own a physical copy guy, so I just think that I'm hoping the game tanks and that the creators learn their lesson and fully release a physical copy of the game, because again, I am a strong believer in always own physical copies. So yeah, I love the game. My favorite Doom game, my favorite modern first-person shooter, but the fact that they just released the first level physically and then the rest you have to buy digitally, yeah, not cool. But really, we're going on a tangent. Let's now talk about my favorite old school first-person shooter, and probably my favorite first-person shooter of all time, Quake. As I just said, Doom the Dark Ages is by far my favorite modern first-person shooter, but Quake on the other hand is my favorite old school first-person shooter, and actually very possibly my favorite first-person shooter of all time. And as I said, Doom the Dark Ages feels like a true spiritual successor to Quake, and it definitely naturally and greatly fits with the continuity of the two recent Doom games. But while Doom 2016 felt like a true modern classic Doom, and Doom Eternal on the other hand felt like an evolution of it, Doom the Dark Ages is much more Quake actually, which again I personally don't mind one bit, since I was always more of a Quake guy anyway than a Doom guy, and more importantly, I just want a good game to play, that's all. Still, now we probably have started talking too much about how Doom the Dark Ages is a spiritual successor to Quake, so let's get on with an actual review of Quake. It was fantastic when it came out, and it still is. I played Quake when I was a kid at friend's house. After elementary school, I would visit my friend's house, and we together would play video games like Doom or Quake, and some other video games too. And both Doom and Quake were awesome, and while my friends seemed to like Doom more, I for some reasons always found Quake more appealing, and now as a full-grown adult, I only reaffirmed my stance very much so. The gameplay of Quake is incredible, and it's clear how much modern first-person shooters very much owe plenty of things to Quake. Sure, there was Wolfenstein and Doom before that, but Quake very much revolutionized the first-person shooter genre. You could do so many things that you couldn't really do in first-person shooters before, just jumping and aiming your weapon as well as running around. I said how Doom the Dark Ages is really more Quake than Doom, but even then, Doom 2016, while it is very much modern Doom, it also very much uses elements of gameplay that Quake introduced. Wolfenstein and Doom were first-person shooters, but Quake was the first-person shooter. It was the one that revolutionized and completely changed the genre and what it really could do. Like, that the game was able to achieve might not seem much now, but back when the game came out, this was all so revolutionary and innovative, and I can actually tell you how much I was impressed when I was playing it at a friend's house. Just running around through maze-like levels, shoot enemies, solve puzzles, collect keys, and shoot at various switches to uncover next paths to proceed further. This is all so much fun, and yet The game is also very challenging, but this is one of those well-balanced difficulties that's challenging but fair. It's about learning and mastering, and there's also a huge weapon variety, including shotguns, railguns, a bomb launcher, as well as a rocket launcher. What I also really love in Quake is when enemies are defeated, their bodies don't disappear but stay and lie there forever, and not many video games do that, not even modern video games. Although enemies do stay lying on the ground longer, they still ultimately disappear, and in the vast majority of old video games, the enemies would likely disappear right away the minute they are defeated, but there were a few that actually had them just lie there, and Quake is one of them. I really loved it. Don't know why, but somehow I always loved it when enemies were leaving their bodies behind without disappearing in video games. Just really love that. Just really appeals to me. Don't know why. The premise and campaign of Quake, I say, is incredible, and yet it's all in the manual. If you just start playing a game, then you're just running around this gothic medieval area and shooting at various monsters without really knowing what's going on, and yet somehow the simplicity and completely not telling you anything, and not just like in the From Software games where you at least get like item descriptions, all that. No, completely without telling you anything, just read the manual if you want to know anything that's going on, yet somehow it's literally one of the biggest appeals of this awesome game. The sheer simplicity and yet so awesome. To elaborate on the campaign though, the story takes place in a creepy gothic medieval setting, but with some technology, and humans made a contact with Lovecraftian creatures through portals called slipgates, and Lovecraftian creatures start massively pouring into the human dimension, and your job is to defeat them. And as the protagonist, you are entering 4 different dimensions and collect 4 runes to fight the final boss. And as I said, since the story being very Lovecraftian, with one of the monsters created by H.P. Lovecraft himself, Shub-Niggurath being the one behind the forces, and you having to slaughter her forces and defeat her as the final boss. That's an awesome preface. Gothic medieval Lovecraftian story, I love that. The atmosphere is so creepy and fantastic, and still one of the best atmospheres in all of gaming. The creepy gothic medieval castles and cathedrals that you're running around through add so much to the very creepy and gothic atmosphere. In some ways also, the whole game feels scary, oppressive, and so claustrophobic, because the game is also pretty challenging, and in contrast to Doom, you don't feel as this force of nature who can just slaughter his way through the demons. You actually feel like you're genuinely in a very scary danger, and how you in general struggle to survive, but you also push yourself through to save humanity, and as a result, in the finale, it actually feels even more rewarding, because you truly feel like you just achieved something great. The final thing I want to talk about in Quake is the overall design of the game, including art and all that. The game is from 1996, and yet it aged super well, and it adds so much to the game's gothic medieval atmosphere and overall scariness and feeling of unease. Like, level design is just spectacular. As I said, they are maze-like, and you get the feeling of claustrophobia and feeling lost in some ways, and yet they are so well designed that you can easily navigate through all the levels and easily figure out where to go next and how to solve the puzzle. You almost never aimlessly wander around to find the path forward. You naturally find it. Level design here feels so much better from almost all the other first-person shooters in existence, and a lot better from a lot of modern video games. And you know what else is amazing?
Quake got a fantastic sequel in the form of Quake II, and there are plenty of more games in the series later, but we'll only focus on Quake II. Later, Quake really became more of a brand, really, anyway, rather than its consistent series, but that's neither here nor there. Quake II, though, is super similar gameplay-wise, but instead of creating a pointless sequel to a fully complete story and game, the writers decided to get creative and completely change the setting and theme, from a gothic medieval Lovecraftian horror to a creepy violent science fiction in space inspired by aliens. And also, the story is now more involved, and while the first Quake had all in the manual, Quake 2 does have few cutscenes to tell you what is happening. And gameplay wise though, Quake 2 is pretty much an improved version of original Quake, with you roaming around the labyrinthian levels, although now, as I said, in science fiction space, violently blowing up enemies to smithereens, solving puzzles, and choosing a weapon from your weapon variety. Which Quake is better though? Personally, I prefer the first one due to how unique and dark it is, but that's completely a matter of personal preference and nothing else. I just love gothic medieval Lovecraftian story of Quake, but dark space science fiction horror of Quake 2 is also great, and honestly, I think both games are very much essential to be played. I suggest playing them both back to back. It's just awesome.
Overall, Quake is an incredible first-person shooter. It's a masterpiece of the old times. And sure, Doom the Dark Ages might be my favorite modern first-person shooter, but Quake on the other hand is very much my favorite old-school first-person shooter and possibly my favorite first-person shooter of all time. And this is a perfect example of a game that shows that oftentimes simplicity and fun is all you need in a good quality video game, and Quake is a perfect example of that. It was incredible and impressed so many people back when it came out, and it's still aged so well now. I have still fond memories of playing it at a friend's house as a kid, and so happy to own a PS5 remastered version. Sure, maybe even better to own a physical copy, but oh well. Those old video games generally are only released digitally anyway. No excuse not to release modern games as on a physical copy, but yep. Quake is by far my favorite old school first-person shooter and possibly my favorite first-person shooter of all time. I just love the gothic medieval atmosphere and the Lovecraftian horrors. And Quake 2 on the other hand, as I said, is a dark science fiction in space and is almost just as amazing. And again, I recommend just playing both Quake and Quake 2 back to back because both games are very much worth your attention. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for checking out this video game review. Press the like button, please subscribe to this channel. What is your favorite old school first person shooter? And talk to you later. Bye!